Great, welcome back. For those of you who were at the dinner last night, you are familiar already with the energetic and passionate speaker we're about to hear from. He was introduced last night, but I'll just go through a very quick introduction now. Professor Anu Ojha, Director of the UK National Space Centre, also a member of ESA's Human Spaceflight and Exploration Advisory Committee. He supports both Harv and Goddard in their relevant departments. He was also invited by the Secretary of State to contribute to the integrated review, and that's led to his onward contribution to both the Directorate and the Command. Involved, interestingly, in a strategic program that was mentioned last night of the allowed collaborations with China. I think he's one of one that's allowed to do this. And he's currently looking with ESA at Moon and Mars exploration. Anu, it's super to welcome you to the stage. I think we're in for a treat. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you again this morning, but I'm probably going to disappoint you, Mark, because what I want to do today is to go into a very different mode. You can see how the title of my presentation gives a generic overview, which I'll talk through in a minute. But quite frankly, I think there are two other strap lines that I should be using, one of which was introduced by Alex this morning. Number one, inspiration is not enough to meet the challenges that we need to, at the pace we need to do this, in both research and innovation and in skills. And secondly, quite frankly, we need to up our game. So what I want to do over the next 25 minutes is to give you a whistle-stop tour of the UK's research and innovation landscape. I want to highlight the priorities, the challenges and the opportunities that we need to tap into in the area of skills development at all ages, from preschool to postgraduate and professional development. And then I want to finish by addressing potentially a point that Mark talked about, the elephant in the room, China, and the resourcing that it is putting into extensively in all of these areas. So before I start, I've got a number of institutional affiliations. I suppose the ones that are most relevant today are my role with STFC, which I'll explain, and my university's role. But I should point out that any opinions that I express, and there are going to be 2 or 3 of them, they are very definitely personal and not institutional. You know, I think the landscape review, the reorganisation of the UK space landscape is giving us tremendous opportunities for much greater synergies between the civil space world, the academic space world that I suppose I'm representing, and the worlds of defence space. And I suppose, you know, we've got many low-hanging fruits that are ripe for exploitation in this area. When we're looking at the challenges of space weather, when we're looking at the opportunities and the challenges of mega constellations and potential multiple conjunctions, there's a wealth of expertise that the academic community can offer. And what I'm really pleased about is there are some existing partnerships long-standing already between individual institutions and entities within the defence sector. But we need to expand this by an order of magnitude if we're to address the challenges that we need to over the next decade, and given the rapid geopolitical and technological pace of change in which we find ourselves absolutely immersed. And so when we look at that, we need to think about how we're going to manage misconceptions. Because on the left-hand side, now this is not exclusive and it's a bit of a stereotype, there is some truth in saying that many of my academic colleagues, the prism through which they see anything to do with defence space is based on their thinking from the 1980s, their understanding of SDI and the role of, as highlighted in Time magazine. And so what we have to do as a defence community, whether we want to or not, is proactively address some of those misconceptions. And in a similar way, there may be some on the defence side who are looking, when we look to the right-hand side of the diagram, yes, that's a bit hyperbolic, but there may be an idea that within the academic community and in the student bodies, you know, we've got a tendency to be sort of anti-defence. Now, of course, there will be institutions that do not fall within those categories, but I suppose the message I'm giving is that we need a much more proactive work to be done on both sides in order to explore the potential synergies which are there to be exploited for maximal advantage. And the reason I'm talking about the role of universities is that when we look historically, United Kingdom academic space science research, was driven by universities, and amongst our universities, we have some global powerhouses. Now, my university, Leicester, is one of those. We've got the largest single-site academic space research group in Europe. As you can see, we've had space instrumentation in space for more than half a century. We've got prime, what we call principal investigator roles on a host of missions for NASA, for the Japanese Space Agency, for ESA, and we're covering the entire range of space applications, from pure astronomy to fundamental research to human robotic exploration to satellite applications. Now, it's not just Leicester, of course. We've got MSSL. We've got the University of Surrey. We've got areas such as Cranfield University, specific areas of expertise. But we can't just leave it to the sorts of discussions at sort of heads of departments level. I think what's needed is that needs to be coupled with leadership exchanges all the way up to vice-chancellor level. Now, there are ways of doing this, but I would say if we want to make the most of the UK's research and innovation landscape and our capabilities, that proactive approach that is community-driven bottom-up, but also strategically driven from the very top, needs to be done in a coherent way and at pace. Now, we hear a lot about the United Kingdom's ambitions to be a science superpower, with the overall intention that 2.4% of our GDP is focused on research and innovation by 2027. Now, what I did is I looked at the ONS website and I grabbed this sort of spaghetti mess of a diagram. It's a few years out of date, and I'm not going to talk you through everything. But the key point I want to make is, number one, that 2.4% of GDP is not going to be provided purely by government. It's a complex intermix of government, the private sector, and we can see how the funding is flowing. And to make sense of it, what I want to do is to highlight the UK's research and innovation landscape above the level of universities in a way that hopefully will make road mapping what you can do and road mapping some of the contributions of the panellists later a little bit more sense. So if we look at what we call the research councils. They are major dispersers of funds to drive research and innovation across the academic landscape. Now, I think you're all familiar with UK Space Agency, so we're going to go on a whistle-stop tour of those research councils of relevance that I think need to be approached proactively and have got tremendous reservoirs of relevant expertise. We're not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to start with my research council, STFC, the Science and Technology Facilities Council. Now, we're a bit different from the others because we don't just disperse funds. We've got an annual budget of about 650, 700 million pounds per year, but crucially, we have 2,000 scientists and engineers of our own. So we are doing the science R&D. We are doing that translation into applications and increasingly commercialization. And of course, many of you here will be familiar with the work that we are doing down at Harwell. We will be managing and running the National Satellite Test Facility, specifically designed, you can see the components here coming down the motorway to Harwell for assembly, to be amongst Europe's largest vacuum and EMC test chambers, scoped specifically for Skynet 6A. But we do a lot more than just our work of relevance and significance than just the stuff we're doing at Harwell and NSTF. In the top right corner, I've also got the representation of our site at Daresbury in the northwest, because in the northwest, we have a real driver in terms of high-performance computing. We've got the Hartree Centre. Now, Alex was talking about that important of we can have all the data in the world, but how can we process it at speed and with a rate of growth that we're going to need to over the next 10 years. So this is where all of those terms come in. AI, machine learning, quantum computing, and it can be a little bit confusing. So we need to tap into the Research Council's expertise. We are going to be housing at Hartree, under STFC, JADE 2, which is going to be the UK's largest supercomputer, purely focused on AI applications. Now, going beyond my research council, looking to the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Councils. They are the research council that is leading the UK's quantum computing technology programme, with hubs around the country. And I think these are areas of expertise that, again, proactively, it's that word I'm going to be using again and again, need to be tapped into. And the reason they do is we can have all of the platforms we have in orbit. But if we want to have capabilities like this, now many of you last night will have seen this visualization. We had the platforms on orbit to produce the visual imagery that underpins this 15, 20 years ago, but we did not have the ground-based computational facilities in terms of computer fluid dynamics modeling. And to address those challenges for the future, we need to be much more deep in this area, and we don't want to bolt on that computational capability quite late into the design phase of a system that we're using. It needs to be done right from the outset. The Natural Environment Research Council, NERC, they are the lead council working with mine, STFC, for the National Centre for Earth Observation. So there's been lots of discussions about how some of our platforms for Earth observations can also have dual use potentially for ISR purposes. But when we look at what the research councils are doing, you know, when we see this hyperspectral, this is specifically a data set for 11 years of sea surface temperature modelling taken by 3 British instruments that were built by STFC. Yes, it's very beautiful. Yes, it's very, very data rich. But of course, as we know, those platforms that were put into orbit or on orbit for scientific purposes are also giving us key intelligence when it comes down to the changing geopolitical landscape that we're in the 21st century. And as an example, you know, the Integrated Review talks about drivers of potential future conflicts. When you look at the challenges of food production, when you look at the challenges of water resources, here we've got data sets measured from space. They're not coming out too clearly about rainfall, the ratio of precipitation to evaporation, how moist the soil is, where's the runoff water. These are variables we can only measure at the cadence and at the resolution we need with platforms from space, and they are vital in terms of intelligence gathering if we are going to look at our adversary nations and their potential for pushing into the areas of conflict, either sub-threshold or over-threshold. And so we've got the intel side as well as the operational side in this area. Now, going away from individual institutions, what about facilitators of moving along that TRL curve that I think there was a question that came in earlier. For those of you that are unfamiliar for this, we have technology readiness curves, and you know, you have levels of, for example, when an innovation is made, you get some seed corn funding that enables it to be prototyped, etc., and you're hoping you'll get all the way to TRL 9 where it goes into commercial operation. But there is what we call this valley of death, where you lose the initial funding that has come down perhaps to an academic centre, and you haven't quite got the commercial pull through to get you into this area. Now, government recognised this several years ago with the establishment of a number of what are called catapults to accelerate the fundamental translation of research to commercial sustainability. And we have a catapult specifically for satellite applications. It's based down at Harwell, and it has a number of regional offices around the United Kingdom, each with a specialism. So at Westcott, we've got a catapult that's specifically got a new space cluster that is glowing up around it, focused on propulsion. Space Park Leicester, you know, my main university, we've got a co-location of academia, of industry and skills development programs to, again, if you're not aware of these catapult centres for satellite applications and their regional specialisms, I would urge you to contact them and to start to look at potential synergistic offerings there. Now, I've mentioned that word new space. You ask 100 different people in the space sector and you'll get 100 different definitions of what new space means. So, you know, my personal one, and it's not exclusive, it's not exhaustive, and it can be tweaked around, is that a company that says it's new space, it's got a fleetness of foot. It's usually got innovators who are younger perhaps than what you get in the big established primes. This is no disservice to the primes, and I see many people from the primes in the audience here. But what they have then is an appetite to drive forwards. And as Alex said, very often, you know, that drive has been because of relative lack of funds. It's been that forcing function for innovation. And people talk about, you know, when did new space start? And I would say, arguably, you know, one of the earliest new space companies was SSTL. So I think many of you are familiar with Sir Martin Sweeting. In the interests of interest, I have to declare he's my chair of trustees. But going back 40 years, when he was an academic at the University of Surrey, what he did is he got his research group together and he said, can we build a small satellite, payload off an existing launch opportunity, buy off-the-shelf technology, and there you had it, UOSat-1. And you know, that really broke the mold in terms of small satellite capabilities. And of course, we saw STL growing and growing and growing. And as Alex pointed out, eventually it was acquired by Airbus Group. It's an interesting tension, of course, that when you get a new space company that is so successful, if it does get acquired and gets the financial stability that was probably the driver for the initial initiators, do you then lose some of your fleetness of foot and your flexibility? But that's something that perhaps we need to think about strategically. And so when it comes down to those new space opportunities, once again, I think this is where defence actors, defence space leaders need to be looking at the proactive role that they can do with universities, which increasingly are setting up their commercialisation and spin-off companies, but trying to look for new opportunities as well. In the interests of time, I'm going to skip past my Mars stuff. But I just want to highlight the words that were given in a speech by Dr. Stacey Dixon, I think it was last year at the US Geo Symposium. She is the United States Deputy Director of National Intelligence, and she recognized in her speech the importance of the US defense establishment sector combining capabilities and working with the commercial world, not just the established primes, but is specifically looking at the role of new space companies and their appetite and their capabilities and their fleetness of foot. Now, if we talk about research and innovation, I want to move on now to the whole issue of skills that, again, Alex mentioned in his talk. I have some real concerns here. This is where I'd actually disagree with what Alex said, because yes, you know, starvation can be that forcing function of innovation, but my concern, you know, my background is as a theoretical physicist and then a long time teaching before I came back into the space sector, is that inspiration is a word that I hate. And the reason I hate it is when you get that phrase, inspire the next generation of scientists and engineers, it's great. But all too often, in my experience, you know, it is a phrase that politicians use. They get their photo opportunities with school children. You get the nice media coverage, and then they move on. We don't get the strategic prioritization. We don't get the funding, and we don't get the long-term sustainability. And yet, this is the absolute bottleneck issue that is going to spell the difference between failure or success for our country's space ambitions. If we are thinking about education and skills development, you can't use a one-size-fits-all approach. I said we need to have granular, differentiated methodologies. You know, what works for primary school students is not going to work for A-level students, is not going to work for university postgrads, is not going to work for professionals retraining coming into our sector. And we need to have a program which is granular enough and differentiated enough, but is holistically working together. Now, I'm really pleased that at the universities level, we've had extensive dialogue between the training needs analysis team from MOD. There are key opportunities and areas of expertise we can tap into. But again, as Alex said, we need to be looking far more than just our immediate requirements. Because if we're looking for a 20, 30-year roadmap, we need to get our young people, you know, cognizant of the opportunities. We need to make sure we get them, because otherwise other sectors will get them, because they're very savvy about opportunities that they have for them. And so I want to talk a little bit about the work that I've been leading with the United Kingdom's National Space Academy programme. Now, we are not a program about teaching about space for its own sake. We use inspirational context from space science to focus in three areas. Firstly, we want to boost student attainment at the equivalent of GCSEs and A-levels in science and mathematics, because those are the subjects that have the highest amount of educational currency. They are the most valuable for young people going forward into a world that is being driven by technological and scientific opportunities. Number two, we want to empower teachers to add to their teaching toolkits. And number three, we want to get young people better equipped to navigate into potential routes in science and engineering, not just the space sector. Because at the end of the day, you know, if you've got somebody who is 14, 15, 16 years old coming to a decision point in their lives, they can see all the websites in the world, but you need to be proactively facilitating the creation of opportunities for engagement with them. We work mainly at high school level. We do some work at university, undergrad and postgraduate level. I've got a team of 50 people around the country, and what you'll see on the left-hand side now is some snapshots of some of our interventions. We don't go for one-off interventions lasting 1 hour. They have a place, that is inspiration, it lights a fire, but it doesn't sustain it. We want to go for extended interventions, and so our interventions are generally half day or full day. We have some programs that are a week long. We have a full-time program in space engineering that is 2 years long, and we've had more than 100 students completing that course and going on into higher apprenticeships and going on into university. To date, we've had 60,000 students participating in our masterclasses. We've trained about 6,000 UK teachers. We've had 7 educational payloads flying on the International Space Station, and we've been heavily involved with HMG's strategic work in China and the United Arab Emirates, as well as with ESA member states. Now, all of that was done from the civil space side. When we got involved 2 years ago with the world of defence space, I was delighted that there was a really proactive and strategically prioritised desire to engage. So, led initially by Serco, but now developed with full support from Athena, we have a series of intensive week-long summer school programmes that are focused not on teaching the students about space, but helping them bridge the gap between the GCSEs and the A-levels or equivalents that they're about to start, using those space contexts to get their academic preparation for their new courses really set in place, and with heavy defence space and civil space engagement. I'd like to thank many of the senior individuals who supported last year's programme and the programmes that we have this year. But we're also supporting RAF Air Cadets, because we have more than 40,000 air cadets around the United Kingdom in more than 800 squadrons. So we're working with the trainers within the RAF Air Cadets, so that by training the trainers, you can cascade down not only the UK's defence space ambitions, but to a body of cadets, you can start to sow the seeds of opportunities in their minds, because you need to have multifaceted approaches. You've got the students who always want to get into space stuff. You've got the students who are sort of vaguely interested. You've got the other students who have no idea about the relevance of space. And then, quite frankly, you have students who are completely disengaged, but in some cases, space is the initial topic that can get them back on track with their studies and therefore able to fulfill their potential. And so we're really excited about the work we're doing directly with students. We're excited about the work we're doing to support other people's students as such. But we've got really bold ambitions for growth. So right now, I know many of you are familiar with the John Egging Trust. And so we are working, and we've had extensive support from senior figures within defence and the civil space sector on an ambitious plan about how we can grow by an order of magnitude as the National Space Academy within a year, in a programme where we think we can hit 50,000 students every year, we can train 5,000 teachers per year, we can get summer schools with 1,000 students per year, and we can do it all with the sort of figures that I won't talk about, but are honestly money down the back of the sofa as far as government is concerned. But it's this sort of prioritisation that we need to do, and we need to do it at multiple levels. In conclusion, though, what's the sense of urgency on all this? Well, I've talked about the research and innovation landscape, I've talked about skills, and I've talked about the future. I did talk about, what the integrated review talked about, that multipolar world that is becoming more and more destabilised. You see, if we don't do it across that entire spectrum of R&I and skills, somebody else is already chucking the kitchen sink at this problem. So, in conclusion, the last 2-3 minutes, my perspectives on China are based on my involvement in the allowed collaborations with China through the UK-China Joint Laboratory in Space Science and Technology. Now, it is more than one person. We have a group of UK scientists and academics and people from HMG who every year we look at what we can collaborate with China. I'm not an expert on China, but this was my first visit in 2014, and 4 years later, this was my 22nd visit. And so, until the pandemic, I think I was on 26, 27 visits to China. And, I've had some insight into the development of China's program. Now, for those of you that can't read Mandarin, this is my version for my Chinese students of what is space science. It's looking out there, exploration, astronomy, going out there, exploration, looking back at Earth satellite applications. China's program started in 1970 with their first satellite, Dongfang 1. And since then, They've gone into all of these areas, but they went at a very incremental, slow, state-controlled, monolithic enterprises, tightly controlled by the government. They went at that sort of pace. And, you know, I've had government minders with me. I've seen their facilities. I've seen the Beijing Astronaut Control Center. I've seen their new launch pad on Hainan Island and their astronaut training center. And it's fair to say that, yes, they did a lot of reverse engineering, allowed reverse engineering with Russia. It's fair to say, you know, there may well have been issues of IP being acquired through other means, but they were going at a steady, slow pace. But in 2016, a really innocuous document called Article 60 was published by the State Council in China. And that changed the landscape completely. Now, what I'm now showing you looks like a bunch of amateur or new space rocketeers, perhaps preparing a payload in the deserts of Utah because it's a space startup company looking at suborbital sounding payloads or whatever. Look more closely. That helmet has got Mandarin written on it. Article 60 set the explosive growth of the Chinese new space sector. And thus far, we've got dozens of companies. Those young engineers that I highlighted there work for iSpace, also known as Beijing Interstellar Glory. This is a company that at its round one valuation was valued at $350 million US. Last year or earlier this year, they put a payload into orbit as the first Chinese new space company to do this. There are dozens of these companies, and they are pushing forwards. And when we look at the latest Chinese 5-year plan, China is harnessing the innovation of these young entrepreneurs in a way that we are doing in new space, but they are really, really accelerating. And it's part of a narrative there that shows you, since 2016, China's overall space ambitions are not just getting bigger, but what they are doing is really having impact. I was fortunate enough to meet Wang Yaping, China's second woman in space, after her first space flight in 2013. That was the primitive Tiangong Space Laboratory. Look now at the China Space Station. This picture from last year, she's just completed a 6-month mission there, became the first Chinese woman to walk in space. ISS components, many of them have been up there for more than 2 decades. This is the most advanced human platform on orbit in terms of the technology and the hardware that is on board. Going to Mars is not easy. On their first attempt, China had an attempt at an orbiter rover lander, and we had this astonishing selfie that was taken by the Zhurong rover on the surface of Mars. And of course, China was the first country in the world to launch a quantum technology satellite, the Meizhou satellite. So China has ambitions not just on the technology, but also in education and skills development. 2 years ago, I was invited with the US Space Foundation to present some masterclasses and teacher workshops at the Space Day of China in 2019 in Changsha, Chairman Mao's home city. Now, we had in the audience, it was a joint presentation with US Space Foundation. The State Department had permitted this on the US side, as did HMG. Now, we had China's first astronaut, young Li Wei, in the audience, so, you know, we were blown away. And, you know, I did a teacher workshop the next day for about 60 teachers. I didn't realize until the end that this day-long teacher workshop was live streamed to 3 million teachers across China. China is pushing forward with research and innovation. It is pushing forward in education. It is pushing forward in outreach and communications. And to show you the ambitions, I just want to finish by explaining the context of China's Space Day and their ambitions. China's Space Day on the 24th of April every year celebrates the launch of their first satellite, Dongfang 1. And in China, the artwork shows you the ambitions. The artwork for this mammoth conference with thousands of delegates shows Chang'e, the lunar goddess, uplifting humanity. This is the narrative that China is pushing to the world and to its own people. But I want to finish with a video footage segment that I shot when I was picked up at the airport in a taxi from Hunan Changsha Airport going to the venue. Because I stopped the taxi and I filmed this. This was a fireworks display to a city of 7 million people just to celebrate a conference. It went on for 45 minutes. And I managed to get a VPN connection. I managed to use WhatsApp. And I sent that footage to one of my ESA colleagues in human robotic exploration. And he said to me, immediately back on a message, I only wish we celebrated space like this in Europe and in the United States. And the serious point is, China is translating those ambitions to become a leader in space by 2045 into reality, because they're addressing R&I, they're addressing skills, they're addressing communications, they're doing it in an integrated way, and they're chucking the resources at it. So a challenge for the future and an opportunity. And I'm not going to repeat what I said last night about the Artemis astronauts. AVM Harv has already mentioned this, but my final thoughts are, don't decouple exploration from the world of satellite applications, because many of you in this room, you are working on the hard edge of satellite applications, be it civil or military, but I know what drew you into our world was the trope of exploration. And so look at the opportunities we have on the civil space side in exploration. And if you can use those as part of your strategic drawing for that next generation of talent, even if it is nothing to do with the actual area of expertise you want those individuals for, tap into that well, because it is incredibly deep and incredibly powerful. Thank you very much, everyone. I think we've got 1 or 2 minutes for questions. I'm sorry I bust my own time limit again by 1 or 2 minutes, but I hope that was of use for everyone in preparation for the panel sessions as well.
Well, the first thing is it certainly wasn't a disappointment. Thank you very much, Anu. That was absolutely fantastic. We will take a few questions, if there are any from the floor. Can't see any with the... Oh, we have one down here, I think.
Professor, thank you very much.
Can you just hang on for them, so we can get people online, otherwise they won't hear you.
Professor, thank you very much. We covered a lot of education for the younger generations, absolutely. In terms of defence, what's your view in how we can educate defence and potentially key leaders at middle and higher level to enable us to appreciate space and take it forward across frontline commands? Thank you.
Yeah, in a nutshell, because I know time is short, the higher you go up the policy chain, and I found this generally in life, you don't want to blind them with the sort of data sets we have when we're defending our PhDs or when we're presenting an academic paper, and yet too many of my colleagues fall into that trap. My simple answer is the messages that resonate with the most recalcitrant, reluctant people in the world, who are generally sort of year 9, year 10 students, they're the ones that resonate with policymakers. So I think we need to do that strategically. Keep it simple, get the text off your slides, but have all the data to back up stuff when you're challenged. But I do think that, I talked about the importance of having bottom-up community approaches married with that strategic approach. I think sometimes what we do is we operate down here and we think, then we'll get strategy in. It's like, no, we need to do the two in concordance with each other. And from my experience, in the last 2 years, I'm not just saying this because I'm with a defence audience, but what you have done on the defence space side has been exactly that. So you've had community building coupled with going in at the very top, securing the support of the PM, securing the support of Cabinet, giving those briefings that AVM Harv talked about. That's exactly the right approach. I think there's something we can learn from the civil world about that approach, to have that ambition and to punch high.
Quick last one, if anybody would care to take the opportunity. We will draw stumps there. Anu, thank you very much,
Mark.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Brilliant.